Welcome to our series on the Westminster Confession of Faith. We are glad that you are here. Today we continue in Chapter 5 with Section 2, which addresses one of the most important and often misunderstood aspects of the doctrine of providence: the relationship between God's sovereign decree and the activity of creatures. If God is truly in control of all things, as Section 1 taught us, then how do creatures have any real freedom or responsibility? This question has puzzled Christians for centuries. The Confession answers it with a vital distinction: the distinction between the first cause and second causes. As we will see, God's certainty and creaturely freedom are not enemies. They belong together in God's wise design. In the previous section, we established the foundational truth that God upholds, directs, disposes, and governs all creatures, actions, and things. But this immediately raises a critical question. If God is in control of everything, does that mean creatures have no real freedom? Are human beings merely puppets on strings? Does divine sovereignty cancel out genuine creaturely activity? These are not just academic questions. They touch the heart of how we understand responsibility, prayer, and the moral life. Section 2 of the Confession addresses this head-on with one of the most important distinctions in Reformed theology: the relationship between God as the first cause and creatures as second causes. The Confession will teach us that God's sovereign decree does not eliminate creaturely freedom. It establishes and governs it. Let us now read the text of Westminster Confession, Chapter 5, Section 2. Although, in relation to the foreknowledge and decree of God, the first cause, all things come to pass immutably and infallibly, yet by the same providence he orders them to fall out, according to the nature of second causes, either necessarily, freely, or contingently. Notice how carefully this statement is constructed. It opens by affirming what Section 1 established, that God's decree is absolutely certain and unchangeable. Everything comes to pass immutably. It cannot be altered, and infallibly, it cannot fail. But then the Confession adds a crucial qualifier. By the very same providence, God orders these events to come about through second causes, and those second causes operate according to their own nature. Some causes operate necessarily, some freely, and some contingently. The divine decree does not flatten all causes into a single mechanical process. Instead, God's providence preserves and governs the distinct character of each cause. The Confession begins by reaffirming what we learned in Section 1. God is the first cause of all things. This term comes from the language of classical theology. God is the first cause in the sense that he is the ultimate origin and ground of everything that exists and everything that happens. Nothing takes place apart from his decree. The Confession says all things come to pass immutably. They cannot be changed, and infallibly, they cannot fail. From God's perspective, there is no uncertainty about any event. What he has decreed will certainly come to pass. The Apostle Peter demonstrates this powerfully on the day of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, he tells the crowd that Jesus was delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. The crucifixion was not an accident or a tragedy that surprised God. It was the outworking of his eternal, unchangeable decree. And yet, and this is the crucial point, Peter immediately adds, "You crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men." The certainty of God's decree did not remove the guilt of those who carried it out. God's sovereignty and human responsibility stand together. What does the Confession mean by second causes? In Reformed theology, a second cause is any created agent or instrument through which God works out his providential plan. While God is the first cause, the ultimate source and sovereign ruler of all events, second causes are the creaturely means by which those events actually take place. Second causes include natural forces like gravity, weather, and the laws of physics. They include human choices and decisions. They include animal instincts and biological processes. In short, second causes are everything in the created order that produces effects. Berkhoff explains that God's concurrence, his cooperation with second causes, means that he works in and through the actions of his creatures. God does not normally bypass the created order to accomplish his purposes. He works through it. A farmer plants seed, and God gives the increase. A doctor prescribes medicine and God grants healing. A person makes a choice and God directs the outcome. The first cause and the second causes are not in competition. They operate on different levels, God as the sovereign Lord and creatures as his instruments. The confession identifies three modes in which second causes operate: necessarily, freely, and contingently. First, some events happen necessarily. These are events governed by the regular laws of nature that God has established. The cycle of seasons, the regularity of day and night, the force of gravity. These are necessary causes that operate with consistency and predictability. God promised in Genesis chapter 8, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." These natural regularities are not independent of God. They are the expression of his faithful providence through necessary causes. Second, some events happen freely. These are the deliberate choices of rational moral agents, human beings and angels. When you choose what to eat for breakfast, when you decide how to respond to a difficult situation, when you make a moral decision, these are free choices. God's decree does not coerce the will. Charles Hodge explains that God so controls the circumstances and inward dispositions of free agents that they freely choose to act in accordance with his plan. Third, some events happen contingently. These are events that depend on other conditions that may or may not occur. A traveler happens to take a certain road at a certain time and meets someone unexpected. The lot is cast into the lap, as Proverbs chapter 16 says, but its every decision is from the Lord. What appears contingent from our perspective is ordained from God's. The great insight of this section is that God's decree makes all events certain without overriding the nature of the causes through which they come to pass. This is what theologians sometimes call the compatibility of divine sovereignty and creaturely freedom. God does not force free agents to act against their wills. He does not suspend the laws of nature to bring about what he has decreed. He does not manipulate contingent events by removing the conditions on which they depend. Rather, he so orders all things that free agents freely choose, natural laws naturally operate, and contingent events contingently occur, all in perfect accordance with his eternal plan. Robert Shaw puts it this way: God has not only decreed the ends, but also the means by which those ends are accomplished. And the means, including the free actions of rational creatures, are as much a part of the decree as the ends themselves. This is the Reformed answer to the charge that sovereignty implies fatalism. Fatalism says events are determined by a blind, impersonal force that overrides all other causes. Biblical providence says events are ordained by a wise, personal God who works through the real activity of his creatures. Proverbs chapter 16 captures this beautifully. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. From a human perspective, the lot falls by chance. From God's perspective, the outcome was certain all along. Both are true simultaneously. Let us consider three discussion questions. Question 1. How does the concept of second causes help us understand the relationship between God's sovereignty and human responsibility? The key is that God and creatures operate on different levels. God is the first cause who decrees all things. Creatures are second causes who act within the framework he has established. Because God works through our real choices rather than bypassing them, we are genuinely responsible for what we do, even though God's plan is certain. Question 2. Can you think of a biblical example where God accomplished his purposes through the free actions of people who did not intend to serve his plan? Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery out of jealousy, yet God used their sinful actions to preserve his people. As Joseph told them in Genesis chapter 50, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." The Assyrian king in Isaiah chapter 10 intended only destruction, but God was using him as the rod of my anger. And the crucifixion of Christ is the supreme example, carried out by lawless men, yet accomplished according to God's definite plan. Question 3. Why is it important that the confession affirms both the certainty of God's decree and the reality of creaturely freedom? Because if we deny God's sovereignty, we lose the comfort of knowing that all things work together for good. But if we deny creaturely freedom, we lose genuine moral responsibility and make God the author of sin. The confession carefully holds both truths together. Let us review what we have learned in this section. God is the first cause of all things. Everything that happens comes to pass immutably and infallibly according to his decree. But God does not act alone in the world. He works through second causes, the created agents and instruments of his providence. These second causes operate according to their own natures. Some events happen necessarily through the regular laws of nature, some happen freely through the deliberate choices of rational agents, and some happen contingently depending on conditions that may or may not occur. The great insight of this section is that God's sovereignty and creaturely agency are not in conflict. The decree makes events certain without coercing or overriding the means by which they come to pass. This is a deeply comforting truth. It means that our choices are real, our actions matter, and yet God's plan is never at risk. Next, in section 3, we will see that God ordinarily makes use of means to accomplish his purposes, yet he is also free to work without, above, and against those means at his pleasure. Thank you for joining us.